or anything because I gave you all a presentation a couple months ago. Our intention was to have you a draft very shortly after that, but things took longer. So you all have a draft now, and we're seeking feedback on the draft. Um, I have already received some feedback from Roanoke County, which is really helpful. I just glanced at it very quickly. I didn't see anything, and correct me, Megan, if this is wrong. I didn't see anything major that necessarily warrants discussion here today, but they had a lot to add, which is exactly what I was looking for, especially in the roadway operations section. I think there was a lot of things to be added there and in some other places. So I guess we really look forward to your feedback, and if you have any substantial feedback that there should be some discussion today, then now's the time to do that. So we're hoping to take a draft, and it might be this draft, to the policy board this month, so they can also have a first reading. We should be able to get a lot of the edits, at least that Megan has already sent. The edits that sent within the next week, I think, can be incorporated in what the policy board will see. But then they won't be approving it this month, of course. They would be approving it next month. So we just want to give them a chance to look it over as well before they have to approve it. So that's the timeline we're looking at. We could take edits sooner than later, but we can continue accepting suggestions and comments for a little while, for about another 3 or 4 weeks.
So Rachel, this is Liz Belcher. I have a suggestion that would be on page 37, which is the map that shows the priority corridors. And I would like to recommend that under Greenway recommendations that Roanoke River Greenway be added, particularly the section from Green Hill, from Do Goods, Green Hill Park to Mill Lane would help address the West Main, but I would suggest adding the whole thing because it also addresses some of the corridors that are not priority, like Brandon and Apperson and 419 intersection, and then Orange Avenue and Gusnick's and those things as you get on the other end of the valley. So if we had a finished Roanoke River Greenway, if we had a completed Roanoke River Greenway, it would address multiple corridors.
Okay, thank you. I made that note.
Rachel, I did have I don't know if it's a comment or a question, and bicycle recommendations, Orange Avenue 460 is listed as a corridor that we ought to consider bicycle accommodations. I don't know what that looks like. Orange Avenue certainly is not a corridor that I would be comfortable with in-road or on-street bicycle lanes. Certainly they could be in the form of a shared use path or parallel, wider sidewalk or something, but I don't know if there needs to be any clarification about what that might look like or whether that corridor is even one that really deserves that much consideration. I don't know.
Okay.
So Rachel, that actually leads me to ask you, this is Liz again, where the Greenway, Bikeway, and pedestrian recommendations came from?
The Greenway plan and the Bikeway plan, the 2012 Bikeway plan, and the pedestrian recommendations came from the pedestrian vision plan.
But it's not all the things that are in those plans, it's right. Select things that are in those plans.
It's those things that are in those plans that are related to, that could be construed as potential, that could help with congestion on those 5 priority corridors. So with the greenways, I felt like we kind of had to stretch a little bit. But as you said, we could consider those that could help with congestion on the non-priority corridors as well.
Rachel, This is Anita. I do have the same question too, like Mark Jamison regarding 24 or Virginia Avenue, but I will send you once I have a list of other things to add to you, hopefully no later than next week, by next Friday.
Thank you. The bikeway plan is scheduled to be updated this year, and I sort of hope to have started that update process at this point. That hasn't happened. So we are operating off of the 2012 bikeway plan, which mostly was just a map. It didn't have specific suggestions, and it certainly didn't go into detail about what it might have a corridor. I think it was orange and pink were the colors in that map from the bikeway plan. So a corridor might be colored orange or pink, but it didn't go into any details as to, like you said, what that accommodation might look like.
I also did think it was interesting that it seemed like a common theme was concerns about congestion on 81, 419, 220, and 460, which I think reflects a lot of what the TTC has been talking about in terms of regional transportation issues. I certainly hope that this will be one of those documents that all of us can continue to focus regionally on addressing issues along those three primary heavily regional corridors, and that can help shape our project applications as we look forward to future funding cycles.
And building off of Mark's comments, that was a number of my comments was, well, we've got a lot of things in the queue. We're addressing a lot of the problems that have been identified. So, it seems to me it might be good to look more closely back at 2014, the 2014 plan, and say, here are all the things that we've done to address congestion, and then look from here going out, now that we have funding for 81 and the DDI at 419 and 220, and 7 projects proposed on Orange Avenue and Challenger Avenue. We're making good progress, and that's not really discussed in the plan at all.
Good point. Thank you.
So my question on that comment, because I have similar things or similar thinkings on it, is there a way to capture essentially projects in the queue that are planned versus actual progress that has actually, I mean, I say actual progress as in stuff that's already been built to this point? Is that two separate discussions, or is that essentially all the same thing?
Yeah, I think that could probably be like 2 separate tables or a column in a table that indicates the status, something along those lines.
Okay, yeah, because showing any progress I think is going to be important.
Rachel, am I correct that, this document came together basically from obviously some traffic and congestion data that was available, but also from public input. So while we do have those projects in the works and we have made some progress, we've not yet really seen the fruits of those efforts. So I guess, Cody and Megan, I certainly agree with you. I guess the difficulty is that the document doesn't necessarily recognize where we are making strides as opposed to maybe we've made strides. Is the document really intended to then shape the future applications? This just helps in terms of the performance measures for us to look at potential future applications, and then we all then recognize where we have made some strides?
Absolutely, and we put in this document that we would do some annual reporting, and our hope is, or as we've been sort of talking about internally, what that annual reporting might look like. We're thinking it would be good to use that annual report as an opportunity to show progress, but also to highlight some missed opportunities as well, just to become more aware of missed opportunities, but certainly to focus on the progress that's been made. That would be a good opportunity. But I agree that is definitely something that should go into this initial document, as some discussion of the progress since 2014.
I do think that to Megan and Cody's comments, perhaps there's a way to fold in some sort of appendix or footnote, or maybe there's a different way to just make some notes in a couple of locations to try to indicate where we are starting to make some progress. Would that satisfy or help Megan and Cody, y'all's concerns?
Absolutely, on my end.
That would be appreciated. I mean, there's the big table near the end of the document that says, here's all the things that are underway, but I think maybe having that in map form and show how those areas overlap with the areas that we're trying to focus on would be very beneficial as well.
Thank you.
And I think a table at the beginning when you say, okay, 2014, we identified these things and these projects have been built. I mean, Elm Avenue interchange wasn't built in 2014. I mean, things have happened and then these additional projects have been funded. There's some things that are worse in terms of congestion, but there's some things that are probably not worse. So it's good to know, to kind of hone in on the things we have to focus on in terms of a congestion.
And exit 150 as well hadn't been done in 2014.
Right.
Rachel, do you have what you need at this point?
I think I do. Thank you.
Any other comments on this topic? Thank you very much, Rachel. And we'll move on to the V-Trans presentations from Katie Schwing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Acting Chair. I'm going to share my screen with you all, so if you'll bear with me for just a moment. Okay, can you all see PowerPoint on your screens? Okay, great. I'm just going to start the show. Okay, so thank you for giving me time on your agenda today. I wanted to provide updates on where the V-Trans team here at OIPE is on the task we are currently working on, which is the prioritization of the V-Trans midterm transportation needs. And I think most of you all should be aware of this process that we've been going through for a while now to establish the needs and now to prioritize them. I'll give an update on, or just quick background on the midterm needs, then what we're thinking of in terms of the actual process for prioritization, and then provide some updates to you all on the engagement portion. So just as a reminder, V-Trans, which is the statewide multimodal long-range transportation plan, is actually developed to have two different sets of transportation needs identified, the midterm needs and long-term needs. So the midterm needs that we're talking about have a planning horizon of about 7 to 10 years, and the idea to include these needs is so that we have sort of a more detailed look at what the transportation issues are around the Commonwealth in order to help develop sort of the 6-year plan type of timeline. So that is why the midterm needs are used as a screening criteria for smart scale applications. They're also one of the many criteria for screening for VDOT revenue sharing applications. And then I'll mention later, we're thinking about including them as criteria for what we're going to be calling the V-Trans, or the multimodal project study pipeline. And then this is separate from long-term needs, which we're also planning to do as part of V-Trans, which will have a longer time frame. This is more of the long-term needs, which will be more policy focused. They won't be as specific as the midterm needs, and we haven't gotten to that task yet as far as the V-Trans update goes. We'll be providing more information to you all on that process later this fall. So the midterm needs which you might recall were approved by the CTB last January. And as a part of that approval, the board directed OIP to move forward with prioritizing the needs. So what the purpose of prioritizing the needs is to help inform / direct VDOT and DRPT planning investments and project development activities. So it the prioritization process won't remove any of the needs that were identified. And as you know, it was quite a involved process to develop those needs, and it's you know, not this project or this process is not meant to scrap those or remove any of those. It's more to establish a hierarchy, if you think of it that way, so that we can direct study and planning dollars to the areas that have the most pressing needs or the most needs. And it also can be used to help develop policies. If we know where we're tending to see more needs, things like that, it can help inform policy development. And then there's opportunities to inform other programs or planning related functions at the statewide level. And then it's also an opportunity for us to provide more information and resources to regional and local entities. More so, that gives more information than just the list of the over 60,000 unique need locations and segments that were identified as part of the needs process. So to give you a little bit more background about what I mentioned earlier, this thing called the VTrans Multimodal Project Study Pipeline, this is something that's sort of in the works right now at the state level, and it's still sort of being fleshed out. It hasn't been approved by the CTB or anything like that yet. But the idea is that the VTrans prioritized needs, which we're talking about today, would be used to inform where studies by VDOT and DRPT would be focused, and those studies, as you already know, are what are used to help develop projects and things like that. So it's sort of a way for us to, like I said, focus where we're doing studies and have a more data-driven approach to deciding where to put study dollars. So I'm going to go over what the actual proposed approach is, and I can answer questions at the end. It would probably be easier for me to get through the steps and then we can talk about it. So what the proposed steps are, there's 4 steps. The first is that we would sort of divvy up the needs into 2 different geographical buckets. Needs that were identified for corridors of statewide significance, which I think you all are familiar with the lingo. So corridors of statewide significance, there's 12 of them across the Commonwealth. We're proposing to identify or to prioritize those needs at the statewide level. So those needs would be ranked, for example, a need in Bristol would be compared against a need in Hampton Roads. The other needs, so needs identified for regional networks, safety, and UDA, IEDA access, which is the industrial and economic development areas. Those we're proposing to prioritize within each of the 9 VDOT districts. So a need in the Salem district would not be compared against the need in the Northern Virginia district. It would only be compared within the district. And the reason for that is really the travel that takes place on COSS, corridors of statewide significance, versus the type of travel that takes place in regional networks and rural areas where we could have safety needs, things like that. So then the next step would be to prioritize the needs within each of their respective need categories. And I think there were 12 or 13 different need categories that we had. They could range from congestion and reliability, safety, pedestrian and bicycle access, transit access, things like that. We're proposing to prioritize or sort of rank those based on 2 criteria. So the severity of the need, so using the actual measure that was used to identify the need, and then tempered with the magnitude criteria. So that would be the number of users of the area where that need is identified. So if it's a congestion need that we identified using travel time index, then we would do travel time index and the vehicle miles traveled for that segment. And so the greater the travel time index ratio and the greater the VMT, the higher ranked that need would be compared to either the state or the district. And then step 3 would be to actually weight and aggregate those needs across the different categories to come up with a location ranking. So there could be many needs in the same area. And the way we've sort of organized the needs is around roadway segments. But as we know, our needs are multimodal and they don't always match exactly with a roadway segment, but that's how we've assigned them. So a roadway segment could have a safety need, a congestion need, transit need, or a bicycle access need, for example. And then in the 4th step, we're planning to sort of adjust scores based on what we're calling influencing factors that we want to make sure we include, because like I said, the real purpose of the prioritization is to identify areas that might be in need of study or planning or things like that. And so we wanted to make sure we took these other items into account. So we're including where there are known needs for bridge and pavement repair, rehab, or replacement, and also exposure to sea level rise, storm surge, and inland riverine flooding. And presence of these factors would only serve to give the location a bump. It wouldn't downgrade any of the locations. It's just saying, hey, you also want to look at this in this area. So where we are in this process is we basically have just finalized our methodology. Actually, either today or tomorrow, we're getting our final outputs from our database. This has been a more challenging process than we thought to get all the data crunched and the output correct. But what we plan on doing is releasing the initial outputs in the form of an interactive web map on our site and gather feedback from you all and our stakeholders before we finalize the prioritized needs. So I know you all have probably all gotten several emails from us for online engagement, so webinars, and then later another email saying that they had been postponed because we weren't finished with the data, unfortunately. But we're working, like I said, we're just about done, and we should be sending out new invitations when we're ready to have another webinar to go over the process in more detail, explain more details about the initial outputs and what exactly went into the process, and then have ability for you all to provide comments online, either through the map or through a comment setup. And then we will take those, any refinements to the CTB for approval. And the idea is to present the final draft by the end of the year. I don't know if it'll be approved by then, but we're aiming for December to give them a final draft, in October to give them an initial draft. So just so you know, I'm your OIP contact for this effort, and you can always reach out directly if you have questions. You don't have to wait for the webinar or provide your comments in the online forum if you don't want to. You can always contact me directly. This is my email and phone number, and I can share these slides with you all if you'd like. But if you all have any questions about the process or sort of need any clarification about the items I just went over, I'd be happy to respond. Brian, is that okay? Or sorry, Mr. Chairmark, is that okay?
Certainly by me, yes.
Okay.
This is Cody. Are you accepting questions now?
Sure, yeah.
So if you could go back a couple slides where you showed off the timetable and where you are now. So at the very end, it says, you know, it's that arrow that says develop solutions based off of the prioritized needs. So in the presentation, you talked a lot about informing the planning piece. And I know you and I have talked a lot about in the past how some plans, you know, is there ever a possibility of those plans informing smart scale? So if I'm reading this timeline right, this means that, you know, those solutions will be in place with plenty of time to help at least inform our next round of applications. Is that correct?
So yeah, one resource that might be helpful for you to take a look at is a presentation that Nick Donahue gave to the CTB about the proposed, what's it called, the multimodal project pipeline, planning pipeline. And the idea is to basically use the prioritized needs to help focus where plans are created, and then those plans, it would be a closer connection to ensure that those plans help to are coordinated with the VTrans needs. So, you know, right now that I wouldn't say there's a lot of conflict between the studies that are done and where the needs are located, but it's more to, I guess, get better efficiency. So I think there's a link towards the beginning of this presentation that goes to that TTB presentation.
Okay.
But the idea is, yeah, to just have a better connection between where we're spending money on studies and then how they relate to the VTrans needs.
So I have one follow-up question that you may have been able to predict. If this is going to tie into planning money, is it eventually going to tie into construction money as well? So if we apply for these high priority projects in smart scale or revenue sharing, will we get like extra points for it?
I have no idea about that. All I know is that it's meant to inform where studies happen and things like that. Of course, it's already set up that if you apply for smart scale, for example, then you have to ensure that your project is consistent with VTrans. So I don't see that changing at all.
Right.
I can't really speak to what the next step would be as far as if this would influence project application.
My only recommendation would be is that if a locality in its infinite wisdom decided to apply for a high priority project, that we could get a little help in the scoring on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think there's a lot of factors that go into how they decide smart scale projects are scored, and I'm not as familiar with all those pieces.
Or revenue sharing, HSIP, any of the programs.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but I haven't heard anything about taking that step.
Okay. Well, thank you, as always.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Michael. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add in there, you know, right now the way this works is the VTrans, the needs are kind of the the step into some of these funding programs. So, you know, if you don't have a need identified in VTrans, you're not eligible to apply for some of these programs. And this is just a refining of those needs down to what are seen as priorities. And then from our understanding on the VDOT side is that we may be limited on, you know, where we can spend money for studies and refinement of projects, kind of like we just went through with all of our smart scale projects. And that could include, you know, in the future, the TA program, the RSTP program, STPG, the revenue sharing that was mentioned. So if they're not somewhere up in these priorities, we as a state may not be able to spend our funding on refining those projects any further. So as I understand right now, it's still that VTrans kind of the door in, the needs, and then this is refining those to where the state spends its money. As an example, and I forgot if it was in this or another presentation I saw, is where, you know, we're spending as a state a lot of money to help develop smart scale projects. And of those, there's only a small portion that actually get funded. So we're, you know, from a financial management standpoint, it could be seen that we're spending a lot of money on some projects that we're not getting any benefit back from because they're not successful in any of the programs. So I think this is a way to help refine kind of where we can spend our money and what are the actual priorities around the state. So the one thing I did want to point out is, you know, Katie mentioned that this timeline, you know, it's pretty tight, and I think it's going to take everyone's involvement to make sure that they're, you know, each locality regional group is able to review this information when it's made available. And Katie, I know you mentioned some regional workshops or regional meetings. Was there going to be a series of those or just one or two? I couldn't remember.
So yeah, this is, since we're doing virtual meetings, these would be webinars essentially, that would be the setup. We're planning to do them statewide. I know last year lots of you participated in the regional workshop that we had in Salem. It would sort of be a similar type of presentation to that first main presentation that we had, except it would be online, and it wouldn't just be the Salem district. It would be either half the state or the whole state covered by that one. And then we would have a follow-up where we could go into more detail based on questions that folks raise, or if we need to clarify anything or things like that. And then sort of if you were there last year, we had breakout groups. That's sort of being supplanted by the online interactive map and commenting.
So Katie, I understand that we should all be looking for invitations to these virtual meetings. Can you just summarize, I mean, what is the purpose of those meetings and what is it that you need or would like to hear from us after those meetings?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, we will be sending out invitations as soon as we can get a date figured out, essentially. But what we would be looking for is for you to both provide general comments on if you think the four-step process that I talked about makes sense in terms of what we're planning to do to identify the highest priority locations, and then to actually go online and use the interactive web map to see if the data actually makes sense and the places that our methodology says are the most important are actually the most important. Because this is a lot of number crunching. And if, you know, if a decision we made, you know, on one of the multiple steps is not a good decision, then the result might pop out with things that are not important to you as an MPO, as a locality, as a district. And we want to know that before we finalize it, because you know, it all gets compounded as we're adding needs into locations and prioritizing them. We want to make sure that the logic is sound.
All right, very good. Any other questions or comments on this topic? All right, thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you. I'm going to exit my screen here. Thanks.
We will move on to other business. Christine, I'll turn it over to you for a long-range transportation plan survey.
Thanks, Mark. So just wanted to let everyone know that we are moving forward with the region's long-range transportation plan. Not quite in the same spot as where Katie is with the VTrans process, but we are trying to get input on needs. Of course, we've done a lot of work already in this area, as you saw with Rachel's presentation, all the public input that was received on congestion specifically. We have other subject matter that's been delved into thoroughly. But this will be an opportunity to look at all of that input that we've already gotten and get any additional input that maybe we've missed, any gaps that citizens feel are important that we need to be looking at. So we'll need your help to disseminate that survey, and that'll be in October. And so I just wanted to give everyone the heads up to please look out for that and to help us in any way you can to get that survey information out to all of the folks in the region. Also, in particular, wanting to get input from all of you if there are particular organizations that might help get input from EJ communities. We're happy to drop off paper copies to any organizations, just trying to find ways to get better representation from our EJ community. So any assistance that you can provide with pointing us to particular organizations would be helpful. And that's what I have on the long range plan survey. And I can move on to the next item, which is additional information for STBG applications. This summer, I had received from folks at VDOT some suggestions on how to improve the application form for the STBG process. And we have over a year until the next round of STBG applications are due. But it's never too early to start thinking about how to improve the process. And so I wanted to just mention one thing that is a bigger item. There's some smaller items which I don't think will be too burdensome to complete, but this one I really wanted to mention, which is project administration. And as the VDOT folks are entering in the projects that were just approved for STBG funding, they're noticing that it's they're missing some information that they need for their system, and in particular, just clarity on who is administering the project, whether that be VDOT or the locality. So just to be thinking throughout the next year as you prepare for next year's STBG project applications, if you are going to be administering the project as the locality, you will need to submit the request to administer form along with your application. And prior to that, please work with VDOT to review the scope, sketch, estimate, and schedule prior to submission. Now, if you want VDOT to be administering the project, of course, review all of that same information with them ahead of time. And then also please submit in some information, whether that be a letter or an email, just acknowledging that they are aware that they're going to be administering the project on your behalf, so that we can have that kind of information figured out ahead of time. There's some small things that I mentioned that VDOT wanted to add to the application form, which are minor, and I wanted to offer to anyone else, if there's suggestions that you have on the application form, to please send them to me, talk with me about them, and we can see about incorporating those improvements to the application form. And I'll just throw it out to Michael to see if there was anything else he wanted to mention about the project administration specifically.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. You know, internally, as we're looking at projects that get funded, you know, from whatever program, especially if they're locally administered, we have to go through that, some paperwork to get that project underway. So what we wanted to do was just have that thought process and that work done up front. So when we, if a project is successful getting funding, we've already got a step out of the way, and then the localities also understand what they're getting into there. The other piece of it that Christina mentioned was having consultation with VDOT before the projects were submitted, the applications were submitted, which would be very similar to what we're doing with Smart Scale. And our goal is to do that with all the programs, because what we're really getting hit on when we get, from the management within VDOT and all the way up to the secretary's level is, having projects get funded and then not knowing what that project really is and what the cost of that project is. So, we've run that in the past with our 6-year program. This Smart Scale process has tried to help refine that and make that better. So when CTB gives money to a project, it's the amount of money the project needs and not a guess. But some of our other programs aren't set up that way. Our TA program is not set up that way currently. The revenue sharing is not set up that way. HSIP and even the STVG program aren't set up that way. And what we want to do is make sure that we give the best cost estimate and, scope to a project prior to it being submitted. So if it is successful, then it has the best chance of, one, being done in a timely manner, getting delivered in a timely manner, but also not changing a whole lot during that process, which would require, a locality maybe coming back to the MPO to ask for more SDBG money, or, a project that's out of one of the other programs. I have to go back to the CTB to ask for money, and also have the potential of getting, getting canned because, there's not enough money to do the project. So that's just my 2 cents.
So Michael, this is Liz. Are you anticipating that the people who get STBG funding will need to have somebody who's gone through the qualifications program, the VDOT qualifications program, to be the administrator?
Well, I think that would be the goal. If it's going to be a locally administered project, we are going to be coming out with that program. So we would want someone to go through that program to have a better understanding of how to administer the project.
Michael, this is Anita. Michael and Christina, if it's not too much, is it possible to have listed as far as, the eligibility? Because I was told that there's certain eligibility requirement in order for whether VDOT can administer the project or locality has to administer the project. And then also I was told that if VDOT is to administer the project, the cost of the project tend to increase a little bit. So is that somewhere that, is it another 10%, 15%? And also I know that TA, as far as the environmental requirements of the portion, VDOT is environmental doing certain portion, but then for Smart Scale, they don't do as much. So I think that'd be good. I know it's on LAP manual, some of these questions that I have, but is that somewhere we can at least get that information? Given the information?
Yeah, I think what we want to try to do is, have an ongoing conversation with the localities that, plan to submit projects through any of these programs, and then try to work through some of those issues that you're talking about prior to a project ever being submitted. So I think we Anita, we may need some follow-up, and I can pull in a couple other people to, that will be part of that discussion down the road. And I think you've already signed up. We did our meeting last week, trying to encourage like an ongoing conversation, trying to get that started. I think you've already signed up for one of our follow-ups. We can discuss more of that then.
Okay. Yes.
And just kind of what that process will be, and in ways that, we think we can help y'all, and ways that you think y'all can help us, and vice versa, and back and forth. So if there's things that you would like to see us do, let's talk about those at those meetings. And then we'll also lay out some things we think would be good for y'all to do at the local level.
Okay, yes, that's good. Yeah, we did.
Yep.
Yeah, we do have that
One of
meeting
our
already set.
goals, yeah, one of our goals with this is to, whittle down the number of projects that are being being developed. As I mentioned earlier, we had 60, right at 60 projects submitted through Smart Scale. This time, if 10 to 20 of those get funded, it's probably going to be in that range somewhere. That's still 40 plus that are not funded, that we spend a lot of money on. And we're not talking about $10,000. We're talking probably more like $50,000 a pop on some of these projects to get them developed, using consultant services and then VDOT staff. So, we would really like to have discussions where we're, listening to the localities and we're talking about data, and we're also, thinking of, what does the locality want to accomplish? What is the data telling us we need to address? And then trying to develop the best project, that has the, best foot forward, the project that has the best opportunity to compete against other projects in the region.
Okay, sounds good.
Michael and Christina, I think I heard you say that you wanted the request to administer forms filled out with the applications. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what I understand. Mhm.
I might ask that we consider adding something to the application form so that the applicant can indicate their desires, but applying doesn't necessarily mean the project is going to get funded. And we may end up completing a lot of request to administer forms for projects that may not get funded. Is that not something that we might consider waiting until the project is actually funded?
Well, I think that's part of the reason we're taking this to you now, is to get feedback just like you're giving us. So, if there's some concerns about doing that, then let's try to figure out, let's get some other folks at the table and figure out what is the best path forward. From our standpoint, we think it would be good to have the request to administer form. If y'all don't think so, then, what can we come to that will allow us to get some information out there that when these projects are funded, when do we try to get those moved forward? One thing we did talk about was potentially having those done once the MPO made their decision, is go ahead and do them at that point instead of waiting for the CTB to make their decision that June. So, that's an option that's out there that would cut down on some of the number. So if y'all would like to discuss that, we'll be glad to, take that into consideration and figure out the best path forward for all of us.
Well, I have to admit, it has been a little while since I've filled out one of those forms. My recollection is that when they first came out, it was a pretty simple form to complete. But am I correct that more recently it's got a lot of the other certification and, locality ability to perform those types of services and things like that? So the form is much longer and much more complicated now, as I recall.
You're correct.
So that's why I'm just suggesting that I think your suggestion is probably appropriate. Once the TPO makes the recommendations, it looks like it's going to get SDBG funds. Certainly, there's still some more work to be done, but at least at that point, everyone has an idea that it's probably going to get it, and then probably makes more sense. But again, I'm happy to talk about that further. I just don't want to put too much burden on anybody and then have the project not get funded, and you've done a lot of that work.
Okay. Yeah, let's just talk further. I'll get Jay and potentially Anthony, and we can, talk about that with you and just try to figure out the best way to move forward with that.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this topic? Christina, anything else under other business?
No, there's nothing else under other business.
All right, as we wrap it up, any comments by anybody on the call today about any other topic? All right, last call, and we'll stand adjourned. Okay, anything else, Christina?
No, that's it, Mark. Thank you so much for chairing the meeting today.
Absolutely, we are adjourned.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.